Welcome to this session of Advanced Organizational Development. Today we will talk about OD views and mindsets from the perspective of various authors. In terms of organizational development, so far you have reviewed a number of different concepts and have read articles that have been written by different experts in the field. Many of them are both academic experts, researchers, as well as practitioners of OD. So in that case, they're bringing the science and also application together jointly. In any case, overall, there are different mindsets and different views that we have in the field of OD. And hopefully you can add your own perspective in the years to come once you continue to write papers, write textbooks or book chapters and practice this material in the field. And obviously, not only you make yourself successful by learning from your own reflections and application, but you help other people, including researchers in the academic area and practitioners jointly by helping them through sharing your learning and findings. But obviously, not everybody is always sold on every single theory because theories come and theories go, and very few are sustainable over time. However, we've seen that OD practices seem to be helping a lot of organizations by bringing about positive changes in each department or organization overall. Roland, one of the authors, claims that organization development is one of the new buzzwords in HR that is primarily driven by various business needs in the areas of management, development, change management, business reengineering, and all these other phenomena that we have read over the past 2 or 3 decades. Roland in 2007 also mentioned that OD must support and work within organizations' overall business strategy if it is to be sustainable. So in the field of HR, we're doing the same thing, right? We're being partners in the strategic element of organizations' life. So by being strategic partners with the chief executives and senior management of every single organization, we're likely to be more helpful as human resource professionals and as OD consultants. Roland also claims that OD takes a view of everything across the entire firm, giving a holistic insight into how various systems, cultures, and people actually impact everything in between and around them. In a way, organization development is interdisciplinary. It is both an art as well as a science. So we gain experience to practice and become better through reflection in application and continuously learning. In OD, we use science or evidence to draw relevant conclusions for every situation and obviously still learn from that, but hopefully you and I document it as well in order to help others benefit as well from our point of view, our learning, our experiences. And we also learned that in dialogic organization development, change is inherently interpretive and discursive. In other words, it's ongoing and continuous in contrast to the perspective that change is episodic and somewhat discrete. That was the view by Bushy and Marshak and Wasserman that have been written over the last decade or so. Dialogic OD, we learned, focuses on practices that are deeply embedded patterns that foster a readiness to disrupt established patterns that we see within existing organizational cultures. Thereby, it enables a shift to more inclusive narratives that we as group members can actually continue within organizations to bring about the positive changes that are desired. So dialogic and communication perspectives tend to address systemic forces that maintain undesirable prevailing narratives and build the capacity to create more inclusive communities in the organizations where you and I work or consult with. Dialogic OD approaches tend to view organizations as meaning-making or maybe sense-making systems where social reality emerges from dialogic processes as well as interactions among various stakeholders, employees, group members, project leaders, and everybody else who is obviously around them working on the project. In practice, though, Rowland in 2007 mentions that real-life OD has to work within what exists in initiatives that are already underway. So there's a need for the organization to respond rapidly to changing business conditions in helping senior people negotiate their way through the complexity, which enables greater organizational effectiveness as we move our way toward the desired changes that we want in the organization. While OD can cause a lot of pain as different issues are confronted within an entrenched organization where conflicts do arise, in the long term, OD will actually create a much stronger organization, thereby creating a competitive advantage in the way the organization does business both internally as well as externally. So it leads to more efficient and effective organization overall. Now let us look at some historical perspectives and views of OD that you may have already read about, but maybe can reflect upon a little bit more. With regards to OD definitions, so far, hopefully you have seen that Bahaudin in 1969 mentioned that OD is an effort that is planned, organization-wide, and managed from the top to increase organization effectiveness and health through planned interventions in organizations' processes using behavioral science knowledge. In 1972, we saw the definition by Burke and Hornstein. They mentioned that organizational development is a process of planned change of an organization's culture from one which avoids an examination of social processes, in other words, especially decision-making, planning, and communication, to one which institutionalizes and legitimizes this examination. We also saw a definition from Burke in 1994, and Burke says organization development is a planned process of change in an organization's culture through the utilization of behavioral science technologies, research, and theory. And today we also see the definition from Cummings and Worley's textbook, where they say organization development is a system-wide application in transfer of behavioral science knowledge to the planned development, improvement, and reinforcement of the strategies, structures, and processes that lead to organization effectiveness. There are many other authors and experts that you are reading, and they will have their own definition and a very, very good explanation of their view about what OD actually stands for. Hopefully you create your own version of OD using your own words, but ultimately we know that there are certain principles or concepts that hold true regardless of which definition we use. So we all agree that organization development is interdisciplinary. It is both an art as well as a science. And obviously, as we gain more experience by practicing OD, we become better and better at it. That is the art part of OD. And the more we actually collect data, keep evidence of best practices, what works, what doesn't work, and reapply and make improvements, the more we make decisions based on science. So OD is both an art and a science simultaneously, because as OD consultants, you need to make decisions that are fact-based, data-based, and evidence-driven, but your experience over time makes you a better and more improved OD consultant. In terms of the history of OD, we see there are four major stems of OD: the T group or laboratory training, the survey, feedback, technology, action research, and then socio-technical and socio-clinical approaches that have been written about, discussed, and practiced or applied in the workplace. The laboratory training, or the T group, this is where participants actually learn from their own actions in the group's evolving dynamics. Have you ever been in an organization where you were basically assigned to a group that you had no control over and did not know these members before, and maybe disagreed based on philosophies and opinions on how to go about a specific project, but ultimately you all came together and worked through your differences and came up with something that none of you could have come individually, perhaps. The survey feedback technology basically means we're developing reliable questionnaires and surveys, and we collect data from relevant personnel. We analyze it for trends and significant results, and feeding the results back to everyone for the action planning process. So in other words, we're trying to be inclusive and get everybody involved so we can create something based on the new knowledge together toward a better future for the project or the problem we're facing. And action research basically means diagnosing, taking action, re-diagnosing, and taking new action based on the learning that we all gained from the experiment. And finally, socio-technical and socio-clinical approaches focus on integration of social requirements of employees with technical requirements that are needed to work in provided environment or department or organization to bring about relevant changes or to move toward a desirable future that is obviously going to make your organization a bit more competitive and sustainable over time. There are some revolutionary values of OD. So OD includes organic systems that are based on mutual confidence and trust rather than mechanical systems which are authority and obedience based. So Warren Bennis, one of the researchers that I have met through the Academy of Management conferences, has emphasized that quite often in his textbooks and written articles on OD topics and practices. Richard Beckhard mentioned that OD's basic unit of change are groups, not individuals. So we are creating a desirable or better future or better solutions to solve existing problems organization-wide through groups, because one individual will never be able to effectively and responsibly meet the requirements of complex problems. And then we saw Tannenbaum's material where he says OD moves mindsets away from resisting and fearing individual differences toward accepting and utilizing them. So he talked about inclusion in a way. Instead of fearing differences, we need to see them as an opportunity to bring in and understand different perspectives and include those different perspectives in the decision making so all of us jointly can move toward a better and more desirable solution to existing problems and hopefully a better future for us all. OD is a mindset or a way of seeing the organization world through inclusion as well as mutual trust and respect. OD is a set of value-based perspectives. OD is a philosophy of organizing, managing, and changing organizations that include the human element. In other words, groups of people working jointly to create meaning in a desirable future. OD is an integration across disciplines of theories, concepts, and methods for understanding and changing human systems. So this is where we bring in anthropology, psychology, sociology, behavioral sciences, all of them to conduct research and obviously use science to make better decisions in organizations. And finally, we can say that OD is a field of study that can grow in practice that gets better and better with experience. There are perhaps two generations of OD that we can look into. The first generation of OD was maybe during the 1960s and 70s and 80s, where the practices were radical departures from accepted values and beliefs that managers and employees practice. So we moved from the status quo at that time toward trust and respect for all employees and managers. So one of my former bosses and deans had written a book about value-driven management, and there was an assumption there that he made in the book. He said one of the assumptions that we all should take into consideration is that all employees are employees. In other words, the employee who started yesterday should be included and engaged in all decision making of organizations, because that person, although only has 1 week or 1 day of tenure, he or she has a perspective that is different from everybody else who's been here for years and years. So that person's perspective should be included in the decision making of the organization. It means we have to have open communication, decentralized decision making. Although the business school usually teaches you that organizations tend to go back and forth every 7 to 10 years. So the more centralized you are, the more you have to move toward decentralization. And once you become fully decentralized, then you have to move more towards centralization in order to benefit from certain efficiencies in the organization. So organizational life changes quite often. We need to be prepared to work with our strength and obviously develop our weaknesses, or at least mitigate against them, so we can be not only competitive, but stay in the industry for a long time. The first generation also focused on collaboration and cooperation among team members and employees. It focused on appropriate use of power, as opposed to just always basically decisions being driven from the top down. We're doing this more inclusively and using our power properly, as opposed to abusive uses of it. And it focused on authentic interpersonal relationships. In other words, with the intention of helping each other, as opposed to the politicking and power grabbing and abusive work environments that show too much incivility among team members and departments. The second generation of OD focuses on transforming organizations, transforming organizational cultures, creating learning organizations. So as Peter Senge mentioned in his textbook in 1990, that we need to create learning teams. In other words, groups have to master learning as teammates. The focus on total quality management has been looked at as a second generation OD, visioning in creating a future that is good for all of us in our company. Business process re-engineering, quality of life, work-life balance, all of these are considered to be second generation OD practices that you and I are learning and hopefully applying in the workplace whenever we have the opportunity to lead changes toward a better, desirable future for all of us. The main conceptual framework of OD is that OD is action research. That is, that it is evidence, science, and data-based. Actions should be derived from data. In other words, we're answering questions like what, so what, and now what. So that's always going to be in the back of your mind as a practitioner in the workplace. As you may recall the quotation from Kurt Lewin that no action without research and no research without action. Well, that's something that you and I should practice on a regular basis in order to reflect, learn, and apply the learning into the next project or next opportunity to bring about desired changes. Action research model basically means we identify a problem, we consult with experts and read the relevant literature to see what has been done in the past, what has worked, and then we gather data and do a preliminary diagnosis of what might be the solution or the prescription for the existing issue in the organization. We feedback that diagnosis to the client, and jointly we make a final diagnosis of what needs to be done for this problem that we jointly agree upon. Then you take joint action planning process. You take action or you implement whatever decision or strategies you agree upon, and then you still continue gathering data after the action in order to feed back into the system the learning points, and also to take corrective action in moving the organization toward the agreed upon future. So according to Cummings and Worley, this is what we consider to be action research model that sort of can guide us. Although there's no step-by-step process in OD, but obviously we should take a methodical approach, and scientific approach to bring about the needed changes. The positive model that is mentioned by Cummings and Worley states that we initiate the inquiry. Inquire into the best practices, you discover certain themes, envision a preferred future, and then you design and deliver ways to create the future together. And this cycle goes back to the inquiring process. So again, you are basically cycling over and over again to get to the point where you need to be. That is considered a positive model. And most of you perhaps been trained in continuous improvement processes in your organizations, or total quality management, which focuses on continuously improving your job to be more efficient and obviously to also be effective by doing the right things at the right time and for the right reasons, and then you do them efficiently or in the right way. The model of planned change tells us that you enter and sign a contract with relevant parties in the organization. You diagnose jointly the problem, you plan and implement the change that is needed, and then you evaluate and institutionalize the change. This way people don't go back to the old ways of doing things. So all of this from the beginning to the end, again, happens in an environment where you constantly learn and feed back into the previous step in order to make any corrective changes or take corrective actions to continue going in the right direction. The good news is you do all of this together, not individually, but together as groups, because OD's primary unit of improvement in bringing about positive changes is the group. A good video to watch about the history of OD would be by Dr. John Scherer. And as you watch this video, you can answer questions about the working definition of OD, as well as think about the contributions of previous experts like Kurt Lewin to the field, as well as Wilfred Bion and Douglas McGregor and other experts in the field. With regards to the evolution in the field of OD, another good interview would be to watch Dr. Roland Sullivan's interview on organizational development, where he talks about how he actually got into this profession, his experiences, best practices, and maybe major events in his life as an OD researcher and consultant. By the way, the single greatest weakness among business leaders is identifying and articulating a compelling vision. As an internal OD consultant or external OD consultant, your goal will be to be a partner with the organization's leaders in the identification and articulation of a compelling vision that drives people toward the desirable change. So in other words, you have to create this motivation for people to want to move from the status quo toward a more desirable future. That's not an easy job, but that's why it is the single greatest weakness among business leaders, as mentioned by the Corporate Leadership Council. Good luck being the type of leader who identifies and articulates a vision that other people want to work toward and achieve. As always, remember that organization development and change management is part of life. So we need to police, evaluate, and improve our consultancy skills every single day. Good luck. Good luck.